بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أحمده وأصلي على رسول الكريم يا سميع البصير يا قريب يا أرحم الراحمين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله إن الله كبير المتعال وهو العلي الكبير وهو ذو الحيبة وذو العزمة وذو القدرة رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي آمين يا رب. Today I want to help people understand why Muslim armies, and in particularly the Pakistani army and also South Asian armies, what is their nature and what is their character, and what is the tradition that they come from, and can the Pak army really be part of Ghazwa-e-Hind based upon these features and characters that I will be discussing. This is an extremely eye-opening and yet tragic discussion. I'm going to use this video that discusses this issue to help understand why Pak army is the way it is, and to help you understand that why Pak army cannot be the army that will be conquering lands for the Muslims in the future. No, it cannot. And I will show you why. How the Pak army units helped the British government in capturing Palestine. How the Muslim army of Muslims from Pakistan were recruited in the British army, which the Pak army today, the Pakistani army today, was formerly the British army, which I'm going to be talking about. And they were recruited to fight Muslims in Egypt, fight Muslims in Mecca, and even till today. What does the Pak army do so well? It fighting its own Muslim brothers and sisters. Then, in the time of Zia al-Haq, they killed more Palestinians, and so on and so forth. So now, let us now understand this. How the Pak army units helped Britain.
Lord Kitchener had been commander-in-chief in India before the war and established an Indian army of 10 divisions. Indian troops were sent to the Western Front under British command in September 1914 and fought at the First Battle of Ypres. By 1915, they had sustained many casualties. As well as fighting on the Western Front, the Indian army also fought at Mesopotamia, Gallipoli, Palestine, East Africa, and Egypt.
These Indian armies were predominantly Muslims from the west part of India. Okay? So these were Muslims fighting, and as you can see in the pictures, they're trying to show Muslims.
1.5 million Indians would volunteer for service in the army, with 800,000 troops fighting in the war, and 72,000 men killed.
You might say, what does this have to do with Pak army today? You'll see how it all connects. The Pakistani armed forces were created in 1947 by the division of the British Indian Army. Okay? And they fought in World War I and World War II on behalf of the British Army. Now, it is their children and grandchildren. You know, those families whose grandfather was in the army and then the father was in the army. And so when that happens, they form a clout of families that come from the British Raj, that were given prestige during the British Raj, and then were left behind to take control of the Muslim masses. And so this is something we'll be discussing in a little bit detail. So Muslims fought in World War I, World War II against the Khilafah of the time.
Many of these soldiers were drawn from provinces which are now parts of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and northwest India. Recruitment from these areas was heavily influenced by the idea of martial races. Like the Sikhs and Gurkhas, Muslims had already fought on behalf of the British.
And this British army was based upon an idea of regiment system and martial races. What were the martial races in India? Sikhs, Punjabi Muslims, so the Muslims of Punjab. This is why Punjab is the kingmaker in Pakistan. This is well known. But the armies were divided based upon their religious types. Sikhs, Punjabi Muslims, Hindu, Jats, etc., etc. Okay, and the Pathans and Afridis, etc., etc. Okay, so there were, and even till today, Pakistan uses the regiment system of that has been left by the British. Okay, so let's now continue here.
And northwest India. Recruitment from these areas was heavily influenced by the idea of martial races. Like the Sikhs and Gurkhas, Muslims had already fought on behalf of the British for decades and were highly regarded.
So the Muslims had fought on the behalf of the British for decades.
There were a number of Muslims of various types in the old Indian army, but most of them came from the Punjab, and the Punjabi Musliman, to give him his correct title, was regarded as being the backbone of the old British Indian army and made up about a third of that army.
So Pakistani troops remembered in service, okay, of the British and the New Zealand and other fronts that they had in the World War I, okay, and also World War II. But Anzac Day is a national day of remembrance in Australia and New Zealand that broadly commemorates all Australians and New Zealanders who served and died in all wars, conflicts, keep making operations and contribution and suffering of all those who had served. Observance on the 25th each year, Anzac Day was originally devised to honor members of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps who served in the Gallipoli campaign, the first engagement in World War I. Okay, and who was involved in this? It was the Pakistani soldiers, the sacrifice and service of Pakistani soldiers attached to the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. Okay, in 1915, Gallipoli campaign were remembered here at service at Australian High Commission. So this is to kind of give you a background to understand the present situation. And to answer the most important question, can this army be the army of Ghazwa-e-Hind? Okay. And the day also saw the first contingent of former Pakistan servicemen march in the Anzac Day parades in Australia. So this is from a movie that is showing a scene from the Battle of Kut. The Battle of Kut was a battle between the British and the Turkish. And the British wanted to bring down the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire. But who was fighting on behalf of the British? It was the Muslims of India. Primarily, they were the backbone of this. And it was Muslims fighting Muslims. And Muslims that were fighting on behalf of the British government. And you know, as much as we talk about how the Saudi government came into existence because it was fighting for the British government against the Ottoman empires, Muslims of Pakistan, the Pakistani Muslims that are today Pakistan, the West Indian Muslims, were also doing the same thing. They had their long beards, they had their tahajjud prayers, they had their Qur'ans, but they were fighting on behalf of the British. Can you believe that? This is what this was the embryonic stages of what would become later on the Pakistani army, which we will take a look at in a second. that red flag is the Ottomans, and then this side, the people with that are fighting on the British. 10 months later, the British recruited more troops from Western India, which is Pakistan today, which is now Pakistan. These Murtadeen helped Britain defeat the Ottomans and the Germans. Pakistan army still formally celebrates its past. On its official website, even till today, it mentions this. Now you'll see why this is important, and why this helps us to understand that, is this the army that will be Ghazwa-e-Hind? Is this the army? Zaid Hamid, who praises the Pakistani army as if the Pakistani army and that person who keeps having dreams, he says he has true dreams about the Pakistani army being the black banners and this and that. Look at your real history. Look at your real history. Look at what you have done. Do you even and this is just all propaganda. Zaid Hamid is propaganda for the Pakistani army and using religion to create kind of like a good relationship, a healthy religious relationship with that very army that did the most devastating un-Islamic things, creating the baby wars in Bangladesh, the baby wars across the world, the baby wars in Palestine, raping the Muslim women and having babies from them. Now, I'm not against Pakistan. My parents are from Pakistan. Okay, and I really loved the idea of Pakistani army being the only army that has nuclear weapons and all of that. But reality is reality. And Pakistan can't progress until they get control of its own army, which is what I'm going to talk about towards the end. But you must recognize the problem to fix the problem. And the British left the army, okay, in basically the army was the biggest, you could say, leftover aspect of itself as it left. Its best representatives was the army of that is compared to the British. Siege of Kut. The Siege of Kut al-Mara, also known as the First Battle of Kut, was the besieging of 8,000 strong British army garrison in the town of Kut, 160 kilometers south of Baghdad, by the Ottoman Empire. In 1915, its population was around 6,500. Following the surrender of the garrison on 29 April 1916, the survivors of the siege were marched to the imprisonment at Aleppo, during which many died. Historian such and such has called the siege the worst defeat of the Allies in World War I. 10 months later, the British army, consisting almost entirely of newly recruited troops from Western India, meaning Pakistan, conquered Kut, Baghdad, and other regions between the fall of Baghdad. So you see why the Pakistani army will never allow Sharia. They'll never allow Islam, because this is not their background. Their background has been fighting Islam. The Pakistani army, in order to change, would have to do a few things that I will mention towards the end of this. But the first and the most, there has to be a clear tawbah from everything that they've done in the past. This is from the Pakistani website, celebrating or talking about or praising their past with the British. So here's from a journal, defensejournal.com. Brigadier Noor Hussein writes, "What motivated these young men to volunteer, give their lives, and suffer captivity and privation in distant lands? Answer is military traditions, a sense of adventure, a livelihood for as long as they lived, loyalty to their oath and flag, fighting aggression and oppression." Okay, so meaning the British had made the Muslims feel like they were fighting for something good, but when they were actually fighting for something bad. And over here I want to mention Shiekh Mahmud al-Hassan rahmatullah alayh was fighting on behalf of the Ottoman Empire against the British and against the Muslims that were fighting with the British. Now, since 1947, their sons and grandsons have been deterring, defending, and defeating aggression against Pakistan's eastern, northern, and western frontiers under the Pakistani flag. Meaning, this group of clout that from Punjab that came on top, they're trying to keep that power intact. Okay? Things never changed. So here's like a sample of an idea, okay? As the British government is busy conducting ceremonies for the First World War centenary program, relatives of the First World War veterans in the Pakistani village feel snubbed. "I fail to understand why the British government has overlooked those brave men of my village who fought for them in the First World War," groans Riaz Ahmed Malik, whose father, Subidar Muhammad Khan, participated in both the First and Second World Wars. After the partition of India, Dumail was given 5 lieutenant generals and 23 brigadiers to Pakistan Army, along with many other junior officers, given to Pakistan by the British, by those that were trained in the British tradition of the army. And the army was the you could say the most important arm left by the British. The governments were weak. The armies were strong. They had been fighting for the British for decades. So in this ISPR song, Army praises its militaries that fought in these lands for the non-Muslims. The Frontier Force Regiment is one of the 6 infantry regiments of Pakistan Army. They're popularly known as PIFers in reference to their military history as Punjab Irregular Force of British Army. So this song in the Pak Army channel praises what they did for the British. During World War I, 124th became famous as baby war babies while fighting in Palestine in 1918. It was renamed as the 10th Battalion and stationed at Karachi as a training battalion in 1921. The battalions were renamed, etc., etc. So this is also in the Pak army. Over here, I'll read this in Urdu and explain in English part of this only, because there's no need to go into details. तकरीबन 15,000 हिंदुस्तानी फौजियों ने फ़लस्तीन के जंगों में जनरल इल्मिन बी की क़यादत में अपनी जानें कुर्बान कर दी. Okay. Almost 15,000 Hindustani Faujas, army people, fought in Palestine, in Palestine, with General such and such under his leadership, and such 15,000 people gave their lives, okay, for the British government, in that made later on this army of Pakistan. And it says in poetry at the end of this, Kaabe kis muh se jaoge Ghalib? With what face are you going to go to the Kaaba in Mecca after what you've done? Sharam tumko magar nahi aati. You have no shame. You have no shame. This is Dr. Asrar Ahmed Rahmatullah Alayh, and see what he said. I'll explain to you what he says. It's in Urdu. It's very, very important what he says.
अंग्रेज की फौज में शामिल होकर खाना काबा पर जाकर गोलियां भी मार चला रहे हैं. अंग्रेज की फौज में शरीक होकर और जनरल एलएनबी को यरूशलेम का कब्जा लेकर दे रहे हैं.
He's saying, you know, you're with the British government and fighting Mecca. You're with the British government and you're handing over Palestine to the British, right? While what?
लेकिन साथ ही तहज्जुद भी पढ़ रहे हैं.
But you're praying your tahajjud prayers.
ऐसे थे फौजी मुसलमान.
In the army there were Muslims.
रोज रेजिमेंट के और पंजाब के बड़े लंबे बाल जुल्फें रखी हुई है, नमाजी है, और
they've kept all the sunnahs of the hair and they're praying and they're keeping tahajjud.
है कहाँ? अंग्रेज की फौज.
Where are they? In the army of the British.
ये तो तागूत की चाकरी कर रहे हो भाई.
You're fighting for Taghut. Meaning, this is now exactly the example of the average young man in the Pakistani army today. You're serving Taghut. You're serving Satan, not Ghazwa-e-Hind. You're serving Taghut. You're serving a force that has been built to hurt Muslims. Unless they do tawbah from top to bottom. And I'll talk about what that means in a little bit. But Dr. Asrar Ahmed Rahmatullah Alayh, this is what he said, and this is the truth. Anyone can dislike the truth, but this is the truth. People have a very strong connection to the armies that their families are in, their people are in. They have a romantic relationship with their armies, but the truth is, the people on the top decide where the steering wheel will go. And in the case of Pakistan, it's not good people on top. It's not.
तागूत के साथ तागूत. हाल ये है कि हुजूर फरमाते हैं, हम मशा मा फासिदिन लियुक़वियहु फ़क़द आन अला हदमिल इस्लाम. जो शख्स किसी फासिक और फाजिल इंसान के साथ.
The Prophet says, "Man masha'a ma zaliman liyuqawwiyahu." Whoever walks with a zalim, walks with him, it's as if he has destroyed the foundations of Islam. And this is the narration that Dr. Asrar Ahmed Rahmatullah Alayh mentions. I'll mention another one. "Man masha'a ma zaliman." Whoever walks with a zalim, faqad kharaja anil Islam. He's come out of Islam. You have your long beards and your tahajjud prayers and your prayer beads, but you're fighting for the British? What nonsense. This is indirectly the same case for the Muslims that are part of the Pak army and that then have to serve the master and do wrong things, immoral things to serve their master. There is no obedience to the creation against the obedience of Allah. He's mentioning the tradition of the Prophet that such a person who walks with the wrongdoer to give him strength is like the one who is digging out the foundations of Islam. This is what the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Official Pak army documentary glorifying its historical formation in Britain's war on the Ottoman Empire, seen from the 2018 film 100 Miles 10 Division, available in ISPR YouTube channel. They were given the Victoria Cross, the highest and most prestigious award, given to who? Muslims who fought on behalf of the British, that later on then formed into what is today called the Pakistani military. Shahmad Khan. Okay. And where he died, this guy Ali Haider, also Victoria Cross. Okay. Part of the British Commonwealth. Okay. And died in Pakistan. Mir Dast, also given Victoria Cross. Khuddadad Khan.
Setting the stage for the story of valor and glory to follow. There are only but a few names among a long list that makes up this 10th Infantry Division. The loyalty and commitment of this division to the land.
And that's key. When you even look at the Pakistani money in the beginning, it was British. Everything was inherited from the British. Now, where does this take us in terms of the Pakistani army today? What did India do? Indian army plans to change old customs and traditions. They did a complete tawbah from their past British legacy. They did a complete tawbah from, and they made their army coup-proof, or you could say army dictatorship-proof. How did they do that? They did that, okay, because, let me share with you why. By the 1970s, the Indian Army Armed Forces had finally been rendered coup-proof, okay, or coup-proof, by comprehensive checks and balances that had been put in place that might be considered to be one of the major achievements of the Nehru era, ensuring the durability of the Indian democracy, an achievement that is not sufficiently recognized, an achievement underscored by the fact that all other South Asian neighbors, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Burma, Sri Lanka, have all experienced military coups, actual and attempted. Wilkinson explains how this coup-proofing was implemented through a package of carefully thought-out measures ranging from diversifying ethnic composition of armed forces to setting up rugged command and control structures, recasting the order of precedence between civil and military authorities, paying close attention to promotions, disallowing army officers from making public statements, creating a counterbalancing paramilitary force, and topping off this entire effort with little touches like ensuring the retired chiefs of staff are usually sent off as ambassadors to faraway countries. Okay, so another aspect of this is that when Pakistan became into being, the Muslim League was basically Qaid-e-Azam and a few people, really consisted of Muslim League, whereas the Congress of India had substantial number of heavy hitters. So the army compared to the government balance was there, that the army was weak. And after the first dictatorship in Pakistan, India made special attempts to get rid of anything that would cause a coup within India, and tried to run towards democracy. And officers were not allowed to make public statements. They were not allowed to get involved in politics. They changed the British structure. They changed the regiment system to some degree, and they still continue to change the names and everything. So what must Pakistan do? In order to really purge the Pakistani military, they must do tawbah. And to do tawbah, they have to own up to their bad history. They have to get rid of anyone who was part of the British army from its beginning. Families that are families of Pakistani army, meaning military families, have to be scrutinized. Okay, their lifestyle has to be scrutinized. Their Islam has to be scrutinized. The Pakistani army needs to revamp its entire structure of accountability, its economics, who funds this. Do you know that the Indian army's revenue was cut in half after the partition in order to control the army? Money was put into other sectors like education and so on and so forth rather than the army. Whichever sector of the government will get the most money will obviously have a bigger say. They're consuming the most resources. And so, even though the Indian army was upset that their pays had been cut, and the prime minister took over the houses, the governor houses and the other houses, the government officials that were those houses and those places that were part of the military. Like, for example, in Pakistan they have Kent, all these areas of Kent in Pakistan. Well, those were given to the politicians by the Indian government, that instead of being left over as part of the military by the British, that were left over from the time of the British. Pakistan never changed anything. Pakistan did not make any reform in its army, in its system, in its racism within its system. And so there needs to be a purging and a proper tawbah. They need to remove anything British and bring Islam and take the Islamic ethos into their army. But as it stands, anyone who thinks that the Pak army is the army of Ghazwa-e-Hind has lost their mind, These, do you even understand the depth of the crime that the Pakistani army is built upon? And do you understand that Allah is fair and He is not going to let the Pakistani army just do all these crimes and build upon all these crimes and never change yourself and never do tawbah? And you think that Allah will make you part of Ghazwa-e-Hind? Have you lost your mind? So, I think this will, let's see, suffice for today, inshallah.
To govern the peoples of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Union of South Africa, Pakistan, and Ceylon, and of your possession.
So Pakistan is mentioned as part of the Commonwealth people that the British are still indirectly ruling. That's why Nawaz Sharif is in England or London, wherever, Britain. So now, this is the picture to show you how the Pak army gets along with its former masters just fine. This picture actually says a lot. So for many of you this might seem shocking. It's not fabricated propaganda, but real history. One could research yourself. This very British lot ruled the country even after partition, and their children and descendants continue to rule Pakistan even today. Just some of the things that I want to go over. Pakistani medal. Tamgai Pakistan was established by King George. Okay, this medal, it has the British symbols on it on one side, and then the Pakistani flag on the other. Okay, let me also, to show you how deep this legacy of the army goes. So the Commander-in-Chief, Pakistani Army from 1947 to 1972. Sir Frank Walter, Sir Douglas David Gracie, then Muhammad Ayub Khan, Muhammad Musa, okay, Muhammad Yahya Khan. These were all people that didn't have beards. They were all clean-shaven. They lived the British lifestyle as it was taught to them by their masters. And this is how they then ruled their, or ran their armies, and why they looked up to the British. And the Northern Command by Sir William, and then Sir Claude, and Sir Alexander, and Sir Robert. And look at the Pakistani judiciary, same thing. It's the British Raj legacy that is also working in hand with the military today. And then the Pakistani rupee, for example, has King George on it, 1 rupee, Hukumat-e-Pakistan, the government of Pakistan. Reserve Bank of India, but on behalf of the Pakistani government, 5 rupees, with, again, King George on it. So then, how can this Pak army bring anything good? Or stand for something good? And then, unless the Pak army purges itself and brings back Islamic symbols, Islamic ideas, Islamic tarbiyah, unless you bring back the sunnah of the Prophet in your army, unless you do real tawbah, then you might have a chance of being part of Ghazwa-e-Hind. But until you don't make those reforms internally, until you don't get out of the British uniform and the British legacies and traditions and rituals and dates and parades and all that, until you don't come out of that legacy, people of Pakistan, this establishment that you have, they are there to make your life a hell in this world and the next. The Pakistani army is not your friend. The Pakistani leadership of the Pakistani army is not your friend. I wish people of Pakistan would turn to Allah and teach its army to turn to Allah. And to do that, you must get rid of all these symbols that show your loyalty to your past, your God-forsaken past. May Allah help the Muslims wake up and understand. Please support my channel, subscribe, and share this.